Hello there. One of the things we learn about humanity is despite our reputation for all good intentions, we're litter bugs. We're constantly leaving stuff kind of floating around in space, despite Starfleet and humanity's greater mission of kind of keeping balance in the universe. There's all this junk floating around. We see various different things that humans had created kind of turn up years later. Sometimes it's ships just abandoned or sort of float around in space. Sometimes something crashed, or more often it's something we lost track of, such as Friendship 1 or Nomad. But every now and again you just find something really, really weird. In the year 2364, for example, the USS Enterprise NCC 1701D encountered a small Earth-made capsule floating in space, about to drift into a star system whose gravity wells would eventually tear the probe apart. It was a binary system, probably unstable or something. Doesn't really explain, but basically it was going to get destroyed if it drifted in. And there's some things to unpack here with this thing. This probe, this satellite, whatever it was a mystery. It was a small craft. It does appear to have a small engine assembly, although we don't know exactly how big it is. It was constructed in the late 20th century. Its construction year again is unknown exactly who built it, but it does seem to be a corporate construction. Basically, the very rich, or other such people, paid for their bodies to be cryogenically suspended, and for whatever reason, they felt the best place to do this was in space. So they're all packed into this thing, dead of course, blasted into space, and it would just sit in orbit until such time as someone had the technology to fix them. But somehow this thing kind of got lost track of, which we'll circle back to in a minute. It's encountered in the year 2364 by the Enterprise drifting into a system. Now initially they're going to leave it to just drift into the system and kind of leave it because they're on a mission. They're waiting for a shuttle to return to the ship. It was pure coincidence they happened to be there, otherwise they would have missed it and they never would have known any different. Data, however, voices his opinion that this is an ancient spacecraft, and an opportunity to examine it would be squandered, as they have nothing else to do, in Riker's own words. They're just sitting around. So Riker says, yeah, you can go, but take Worf with you. Alrighty. They beam over to the capsule and discover that A, there's still power, there's minimal oxygen atmosphere, and there's gravity, which is interesting in and of itself, which again we're going to circle back to. I'm actually going to touch on this one, right? Data doesn't need to breathe, right? That's fine. But Worf does. And Data only determines when they get aboard the capsule that there's minimum oxygen atmosphere. What if there was no atmosphere? The power's still on, but the main computer's offline. Could they not have scanned this? Did they transfer some power over? Because we know ships can do like a power transfer, like just send energy over. Maybe they did that. Somehow this thing still had power, which again we're going to circle back to. The interior of the capsule appears to be just one deck, with blast doors which are manually controlled, segmenting out the different compartments. As they begin to explore the capsule, they find a series of cryogenic chambers with mostly rotten human corpses in, but they find 3 individual humans still intact, not alive of course, but they died from perfectly treatable diseases. They're beamed over to the Enterprise and they're recovered. These 3 individuals are Claire Raymond, a 35-year-old homemaker, Ralph Oppenhaus, a 55 financier and rich git, and LQ Sonny Clements. He's not known how old he is, but he is capable of playing the guitar, and he appears to be from the southern United States, and he likes whiskey. Pretty much all we learn about this guy is he can sing, he likes guitars, he likes whiskey, and he died of basically liver failure, which is hardly shocking because did I mention he likes whiskey. Now, in addition to this, we find out a bit about their backstory. They're actually become fairly instrumental, particularly Ralph, as it turns out is quite good at reading people because of his career background, and you can tell when they encounter the Romulans. The bigger story going on is there's a number of colonies on both sides of the neutral zone that have disappeared. Both sides suspect the other. Turns out neither side is responsible. It's a third-party player who we'll learn about later, not in this episode, but we will learn about. And he can tell that the Romulans are bluffing. They don't know what happened to the colonies any more than the Enterprise does, and they're basically trying to bluff Starfleet into telling them what they want to know. And yeah, that's the sort of the crux of it. But what I actually want to circle around to is the actual capsule itself and a couple of weird things about it. First of all, like I said, we can't really tell its size. It appears to have an engine assembly on one side, which are probably for maneuvering thrusters, just to keep it in orbit. It's powered, seemingly, by batteries, and are augmented by the solar collector panels that are on either side of it. Otherwise, it's a fairly mundane looking thing with some numbering on the hull to number the different segments that it was constructed from. Probably a mass-produced piece of technology. Either just interrupting whatever it is that you were just watching to shamelessly self-promote my own business. Now, for those of you who don't know, me and my partner recently started a small company which is currently online, but we're hoping will lead to our own brand and have its own physical location sometime in the future. At the moment, there are t-shirts, hoodies and other items on there that are both branded from different suppliers, as well as people I've been working with to design our own bespoke design t-shirts and hoodies, some of which were designed by my wife and others again by a third-party artist. And it's all on the website currently now. It is still growing, but any help that you could give, if there's anything on there you like, just going to the website, looking at it, is helping the website get engagement. If there's anything you do happen to like on there, then that will also be fantastic and a great way to support this channel. At the moment, there's nothing particularly on there that is directly linked to this channel, other than the fact that I'm a little different as a person, generally speaking, and I've made a website that reflects something like that of my personality. I don't want to create a brand that's entirely normal, quote unquote, and want to go a little different. Now, at the moment, again, it is still in the early stages of its growth, but any help that can be provided by you would be greatly appreciated. And with that said, back to whatever it is you were just watching. The things I get stuck on. First of all, let's cover some of it. We go to the interior. Fine, it's got power still, because it's approaching a solar system. It's got solar panels. Maybe it's collecting up a bit of power. It's got gravity. Now, the only ship from the late 20th century we know that had gravity was the Botany Bay. And what we understand about the Botany Bay, which was Khan Noonien Singh's ship that he used to escape Earth, I should point out, it was developed using some alien technology and augmented knowledge. Now, are we seeing an example of a piece of technology from the late 20th century which actually is indicating that some of that technology was not lost, and maybe someone, rich people, corporations, used it and took it to the next level, but didn't continue to use the technology in any other meaningful way? That's the first thing I'm kind of surprised by. Because Data and Worf, particularly Data, I mean, can forgive Worf maybe for not knowing so much about early Earth technology, but Data's not surprised that this thing has gravity. So we can assume he accessed in the Enterprise's computer maybe a bit of information about the capsule before they went over, and we can assume that he did do some kind of scans to make sure the environment was safe, at least for Worf, if not just for himself, as he's a little sturdier than a Klingon. The thing I want to circle back to is, first of all, they see this capsule. Now, these are explorers. This is a historical artifact. It's a nearly 400-year-old spacecraft that was built on Earth. They openly admit it's an open mystery as to how it got here, but they don't feel a need to investigate that mystery. They're just happy to let it float on by into the system. Worf says he could use a tractor beam to nudge its trajectory so that it enter maybe a safe orbit of the system or something. They could come back to it days, weeks, months, even years later to carry on figuring out why this thing is here. They're not, I mean, Data's clearly curious, but Riker isn't. I know he's a little focused on the mission, but the mission is sit around and wait for a shuttle. They're not the least bit curious. How this thing got there? That's weird. And the next thing is, how did it get there? There's an untold story here. This thing is not warp capable. Now, the fastest spacecraft produced in the late 20th century, let's go with one of the Voyager probes, without alien assistance, it will take tens of thousands of years for one of those probes to reach our nearest star system. Have we ever covered that space is really big? And unless you can travel faster than light, really big takes a long time to travel across, especially when your technology is thrusters, chemically powered thrusters. So how the hell did it? This couldn't have possibly have got out there either without alien assistance or a spatial anomaly similar to the Ares 4 module that got thrown into the Delta Quadrant because of an anomaly. So how did they get there? They're not curious. And then here's the dark side of the story. When they go into this thing, right, some of the environmental containment systems on the capsules have been damaged. So instead of being well preserved human remains, you've got rotten human remains. But here's another thought. They're not skeletonized. The ship's not in deep cold. They're just rotten. So how recently did they fail? The bigger question, more interesting question to me, is several of the modules were empty. Now, let's assume that it was expensive to have your loved one or yourself placed into this module, which means they want to, and we know that, you know, blasting something into space in the late 20th century wasn't cheap. You're going to want to make as much money as possible. So why then would they send up empty containers? My hypothesis, they wouldn't. You'd fill every single cryo unit, unless they were sending up the bodies to put into the cryo units. But that doesn't make sense. You'd launch the entire module, right, with all the preserved bodies on board, not send them one at a time up to it. So again, why would they send empty freezers with no people inside them? I don't think they would. What happened to them? And more importantly, were they alive when they were removed? Did someone revive them, just like the Enterprise did? Where did those people go? What happened to them? All of these could have been answered by studying the module. And yet they allow the module with the remaining corpses to just drift off into a system without further investigation, without wondering how it got into this region of space in the first place. And I find that very strange. Now, I'm not saying there's any kind of conspiracy going on in Starfleet. I'm not saying Riker had some knowledge that we're not privy to. No, it was just he wasn't interested, which is strange for Riker. These people are explorers, they're scientists, and this is a part of living history. And they treat the people they revive as irritating and inconvenient. They treat the module itself as uninteresting and irrelevant. Whereas in reality, they should have been taking a look at this and going, wow, a 400-year-old spacecraft from Earth that's thousands, or well, maybe not thousands, certainly tens of, if not hundreds of light years away from Earth, 400 years after its construction. That doesn't make sense. And then, the data says that he can probably download the information from the ship's computer. But there's a lot of gaps. It's possible they did come back and investigate it, but we don't know anything about that. So, I give it to you. What the hell was going on with this probe? Why didn't anyone want to look inside the module? Why didn't they look into this further? Was it a spatial anomaly that dragged out here? Or more likely, I think alien intervention, because look at the state of the Ares 4. It's torn to pieces because it went through an uncontrolled entry into a spatial phenomena and battered and bruised around. Now, assuming that this probe was moved manually, that would explain why it was a lot more stable. It wasn't damaged, it wasn't as broken, it was still functional, it still had power, and also the bodies were not dissolved, basically. They were still pretty much there, they weren't skeletonized. So, was there some kind of time displacement as well? Because the probe has still got power, it's still intact, and the bodies have not, although they have certainly decayed, they're not rotten. It's possible that the breach in the containment merely slowed down the process of decomposition, and it actually took decades, if not centuries, to decompose. That's possible. But whatever dragged it out here, why did it drag it out there? If it was done by an alien race, why did they pick it up? Why did this thing leave Earth's orbit in the first place? If assuming it was in Earth's orbit, which we can assume in late 20th century it probably was. Again, there's a lot of open questions, and I want answers. And there we have it. We're at the end of this little exploration of this strange little capsule encountered and then ignored by the Enterprise. If you liked this video, please like, share and subscribe. Comment down below on your thoughts on exactly how it got out there, what happened to it, what happened to the missing people, if they are indeed missing, or do you think they maybe would have sent this thing up with empty cryo units, considering, money. Let me know in the comment section below. And we're at the end of this video. Thank you for watching, and bye bye.